In 1948 to 1951, Israel's population increases from about 650,000 to slightly over 1.3 million. The result of an influx of some 684,000 immigrants. Israeli authorities steal the vacant Palestinian villages, urban dwellings, and farmland to house and feed the immigrants, causing conflict. The absorption of Palestinians' land property into the Israeli economy makes it next to impossible for Israel to consider the reparation of the Palestinians. This led to the Six-Day War. It's also called June War of the Third Arab-Israeli War. The war that took place from June 5th to 10th, 1967, and was the Third Arab-Israeli Wars.
Arab states went to war again. It was called the 6 Days War because, get this, it lasted 6 days. Israel won and then gained control over the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, the Sinai Peninsula, and the Golan Heights. So the 1947 proposal looked like this. By 1967, things looked like this. Then the UN passed Resolution 242. Man, they are good at naming resolutions, which outlined a basic framework for achieving peace, including Israel withdrawing from the territory acquired in the war, and all participants recognizing the rights of both a Palestinian and an Israeli state to exist. This, of course, did not happen. After the war, the broader Israeli-Arab conflict morphed into a more specific Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And this is a nice moment to note that not all Muslims are Arabs, not all Arabs are Palestinians, and not all Palestinians are Muslims. Like, there's a significant Christian minority of Palestinians, for instance. Palestinian is a word used to describe the ethnic identity of those who have historically lived in Palestine. There were, for instance, lots of Christians in the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or PLO, formed in 1964 and led by Yasser Arafat. The PLO oversaw guerrilla groups that attacked civilians, but also used non-violent approaches to try to achieve a Palestinian state. And meanwhile, the Israeli government began to establish Jewish settlements in what had been Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. There are now over 350,000 Jewish settlers in the West Bank and over 200,000 in East Jerusalem. And these settlements are illegal according to international law, but Israel counters by saying that they aren't really illegal because Palestine isn't really a state. By the late 1980s, Palestinians launched the first Intifada, which literally means shaking off. And this began with boycotts of Israeli products and services and refusing to pay Israeli taxes. But when the Israeli armed forces cracked down on protesters, violence ensued. And the first Intifada also saw the founding of Hamas, which launched the first suicide bombing against Israel in 1993. Hamas gained support partly because of its militancy, but mostly because of its social welfare projects in Gaza. It built and staffed schools, mosques, and clinics. The most important legacy of the First Intifada was the emergence of peace talks between Palestinians and Israelis. This led to the Oslo Accords and a peace process based on our old friend United Nations Security Council Resolution 242. But there were a lot of issues to resolve. I mean, putting aside the question of how to...
In 1980, dictator Saddam Hussein started the Iraq War. Iraq invaded Iran triggering a 8-year war which established the region and harshly devastated both countries. Then the Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein claimed as a reason for the invasion as a territorial dispute over the Shatt al-Arab, the waterway which forms the boundary between two countries. The casualties on both sides were tremendous. Also, the war damages.
Iraq's leader was Saddam Hussein. You may have heard of him. Saddam wanted to be the undisputed big dog in the region. He wanted control of the Shatt al-Arab waterway, the watery border between Iran and Iraq. Shatt al-Arab was where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers came together. It had been disputed territory for centuries, and it was Iraq's only access point to the waters of the Persian Gulf. Saddam, a Sunni Muslim, also wanted to put a check on the Shiite Muslim majority in his own nation. Iraqi Shiites had been feeling empowered by the Shiite-led revolution across the border in Iran. On September 22nd, 1980, whammo. Iraq took Iran by surprise and invaded the Iranian province of Khuzestan. Within the month, Iraq had captured the Iranian city of Khorramshahr. Saddam thought he could capitalize on the confusion of Iran's recent revolution. Many of Iran's military leaders had been purged during the upheaval. Plus, Iran was feeling isolated by the international community. Keep in mind, Iran was still in possession of 52 American hostages taken the year before. They were nobody's friend, but the plan backfired. By attacking Iran, Saddam helped unify the nation against a common enemy, himself. Iran halted the invading Iraqis and then counterattacked. The Iraqis had to cede ground, and by 1982, Iran had recaptured Khorramshahr. And then, Iran kept pushing. Iraq was on the defensive and wanted to end the war it had started. But Iran's leader, the Ayatollah Khomeini, wasn't all that interested in peace. He wanted to overthrow Saddam, and Iran thought it could strike a major blow by capturing the Iraqi port city of Basra. Iran had the demographic advantage. It outnumbered Iraq 3-1. Iraq, on the other hand, had access to more sophisticated weaponry and a larger and highly trained officer corps. These relative strengths canceled each other out, resulting in a stalemate. For the next 6 years, Iran waged war against Iraq using a numerically strong, technologically weak army. Often, this meant pitting inexperienced soldiers against Iraq's high-powered weaponry. Again and again, Iran was repelled. The loss of life was tremendous. By 1988, the war was wearing thin on the demoralized Iranians, with little to show after years of fighting. In April of that year, Iraq went on the offensive, using ground forces and gaining territory yet again. Iran said, "Okay, we've had enough." In July of 1988, Iran and Iraq accepted a peace agreement brokered by the United Nations. Security Council resolution.
The Suez Crisis started on October 29, 1956, even though the situation had been brewing for some time. But then the Israeli armed forces pushed through into Egypt, going after the Suez Canal. Even though the Egyptian president Gamal Abdel Nasser had just nationalized the canal in July of that same year, initiating the Suez Canal as Egypt's. The Israelis soon got the French and British forces on their side, which nearly brought the Soviet Union into conflict. This furthermore dented the relationships with the United States. Finally, the British, French, Israeli governments
So
backed
the
off.
Anglo-Egyptian treaty was no longer in effect. The British thought otherwise and refused to leave. Because of this, violence steadily increased between Egyptians and British troops. On January 25, 1952, British forces attempted to disarm, or take the weapons away from, a troublesome Egyptian police force. A shootout resulted in the deaths of 41 Egyptians. After this, anti-Western riots protested the shootings, causing chaos on the streets of Cairo and resulting in the deaths of 11 British citizens. A military coup, or violent overthrow, removed the Egyptian monarchy and placed a dude named Gamal Abdel Nasser in power. Nasser wanted Egypt to be as powerful as possible in the region, so he did whatever he could to make that a reality, including exploiting the Cold War that was going on, which divided most of the world at the time. First of all, Nasser didn't so much like the establishment of Israel, and his troops often got into battles with Israel along the border of the two countries. Second, he gladly accepted aid and weapons from the Soviet Union, who would become a big friend. Third, he also gladly accepted money offered from the United Kingdom and the United States to build a dam.
Whoa, 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 Mr. B, watch your mouth.
Whoa, 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 I'm not swearing. I'm talking about the dams that retain water.
Oh, okay, my bad.
Anyway, this dam was to control the flooding of the Nile River. However, when the United Kingdom and the United States found out that Egypt was getting cozy with the Soviet Union and other communist countries, it broke their promise to loan money for the construction of the dam. Nasser retaliated by ordering the Suez Canal seized and nationalized, meaning the Egyptian government would now control it. Nasser wanted to charge tolls through the canal to pay for the dam they needed. The UK hated the move and began to plan an assault to retake the canal. They got the support of France, who was also mad at Nasser, and Israel, who obviously had beef with Egypt due to the whole warfare at their border with them thing. The Israelis struck first, on October 26, 1956. 2 days later, British and French military forces joined them, and the three countries easily took over the canal. Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev strongly criticized the invasion and threatened to strike nuclear missiles on Western Europe if the Israeli, French, and British forces did not withdraw. This caught the attention of U.S. President Dwight Eisenhower. Eisenhower's administration was frankly upset with everyone except Egypt. They were upset that the Soviet Union was recklessly threatening nuclear war. They were also upset that the United Kingdom had not informed them of their plans to invade the canal. The U.S. threatened all three nations with economic sanctions if they persisted in their attack. In addition, most of the world viewed the invasion negatively, as if the UK, France, and Israel were the bullies. There were massive protests throughout the Middle East. All of this economic and political pressure was just too much. Led by the United States, the United Nations pressured the United Kingdom, that's a lot of Uniteds, and France to accept a ceasefire, or temporary stoppage of war, on November 6th. On December 22nd, the United Nations forced the United Kingdom and France to evacuate their troops, and after Israeli forces withdrew in March 1957,